You guys are already very eager to converse. So I'll be giving you the next 10 minutes in your groups to just reflect on what our panelists have said today. We had Prof. Breakfast telling us about the governance of South Africa, looking at how the coalition government has changed the trajectory of what our landscape is going to be looking like where governance is concerned. We had Mbali speaking to us about civil society, getting involved, and then we had Tobani then giving us a look as to our realization of freedom. Where are we? Closer, further, so on and so forth. So now this is a perfect time for us to engage in our tables where we are seated. Let's talk about that. And if there are areas where you feel like you were not answered, this would also be a perfect time to talk amongst yourselves. But we'll also be bringing back our panelists after your 10 minutes. We'll be bringing back our panelists. So what I would ask is that, well, firstly, when we bring back our panelists, please tell us what your group spoke about. So please nominate a person who's going to present on your behalf to say this is what our group thinks of the relevant various discussions, and then after that I'll open up a section where we can have Q&A, clarity-seeking questions. Are we clear? Is anybody lost? Anybody need to be found? Okay, so 10 minutes starts now. I'll also be walking around if anybody still has any questions, if they're unclear about anything.
On the question of the GNU, is what we were looking at, and we found that the composition of the Government of National Unity is not a true reflection of the voters' choices in South Africa, in the sense that the ANC has some 21 ministers and 33 deputies, the DA has 6 ministers and 6 deputies, the IFP has 2 ministers and 2 deputies, the PA, Good, Freedom Front Plus and the PAC have 1 minister each. Al-Jamar and UDM have 1 deputy minister each. And if we look at the statistics of it, the ANC has 3 times more ministers than what the DA has. They have 10 times more ministers than what the IFP has. And they have 20 times more ministers than what the smaller parties have that were allocated a seat each. So is this really a true reflection of a government of national unity? I think not, especially when you take into consideration the fact that 76% of the cabinet is ANC. So although they've got 40% of the vote, they still hold 76% of the power. So is there a true reflection there? And then what's very concerning to me, or to us rather, was the fact that if you took your deputy ministers and your ministers along with your executive members of the cabinet, you come up to some 84 people. Can our economy really afford that? To be paying out in excess of 1 billion rand per month to ministers, deputy ministers, and so on and so forth. It's just being excessive, it's just being exhaustive on our economy, it's exhaustive on the citizen. And not many of the citizens know about the economics of it all. They're sitting there and they're looking and say, oh no, we've got a government of national unity. Oh look there, we've got 2 ministers in international relations. But what does it cost us? What does it cost us? So we need to also think, what was Cyril's logic and thinking around this? Who was he trying to appease? Who was he trying to please? He took AMG from education and he put it in defense. Does that mean that only 36% of the weaponry must work? 30% rather. So some of his logic that was used is also questionable in his placement of certain people in certain ministries. And even with what was then the official opposition and now part of the Government of National Unity, the question is, what is now going on with the DA? Why are they suddenly wanting to protect Cyril? During the campaign, they wanted to expose him and have him arrested and have him impeached and have him frog-marched into a court and things like that. Now suddenly they're saying, no, we need to protect the president of the country. So there's lots of questions left hanging in the air. What was promised to who in order for them to get to where they are now?
And at what expense?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Panelists, I think loud and clear, starting with, is this really a government of national unity? Is this really a coalition where one party is still holding majority of it? those are some of the questions that were raised there. I will take another hand and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Whoever feels as if they can respond will respond. I won't assign that to anybody. Any other hand? Thank you.
Oh dear Lord, I thought my Sasko days had long gone. Seemingly they still follow me. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Bandile Matola. I actually like the question that they posed. They asked, is it economically sustainable for us, for the country to sustain so many ministers? And it drives straight directly to our point on what is liberation. Because for us, liberation is consisting of 5 elements: the political liberation, social liberation, cultural liberation, economic liberation, and psychological liberation. Now, when you look at that, can we honestly say that we as South Africa are liberated? This is a question that Utoban had opened with earlier. Now, secondly, we wanted to talk about the second point that Tobani mentioned, the one of politics of personalities. In South Africa, probably in this room, about 3 to 7% of people read all the political manifestos of the organizations that were contesting elections. Now, a person that read all those, we can say, is making an informed decision because you have assessed all the promises that political parties are making. Now, it makes no sense to us that ATM did not get any seats when we look at the cabinet seats, when you look at their manifesto. So what can we do to ensure that we have a more informed society that is not going to make decisions based on personalities? Thirdly, we had a problem with Section 24A because most of the people that actually that registered, had SMSs and went to voting stations were turned back. So the IEC needs to fix those issues because for me it says it's an internal issue if 82,156 people made an informed decision to say, I know I'm going to be in Durban and not in Newcastle where I come from. I want to vote in Durban. I get an SMS and when I get there I'm told I can't vote. Lastly, we wanted to, for me, there's no such a thing as a GNU in South Africa. There are certain conditions that necessitate for a government of national unity, whether there was civil war or whatever unrest in the country. Under these conditions, there's no such in South Africa. There's no such. And I'm saying this fully aware that I'm wearing an ANC weekly t-shirt and disproving the theory that says we have a GNU. So my question is, under what conditions do we have a government of national unity, and do the current conditions necessitate for a GNU to be in effect? Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
On 2 issues. The first one is about the state, because the executive is part of the state. We're talking about the state, talking about the legislative institution, the executive institution, and the judiciary. Now, there is what we call in politics neo-patrimonialism. Neo-patrimonialism in plain English is when you use the state machinery to dish out favors to your own henchmen in exchange for support in order for you to hold on to power a bit longer. So Ramaphosa is indebted to the people who made him to hold the position that he holds. He has to pay them back. There are no freebies in politics. And his strategic advantage is that the Constitution doesn't limit him in terms of the number of ministers he can appoint and so on. Now, with regard to the role of the markets, I've got mixed feelings on this one, because part of me thinks that, he who pays the piper calls the tune, and that it's not the conscience of man that determines human behavior, but the material conditions, meaning that the behavior of a person is influenced by the economy. But I think there are some nuances of power. For instance, the arrogance of power of the ANC has caught up with them in a big way, because the ANC has broken social contract. They did not honor the commitments that they made, and because of that, they were punished in a big way. So I'm arguing that I think people do have a sense of power. I don't think that power resides only with the market, because where does political legitimacy come from? It comes from the people.
Thank you. Mbali, let me bring you in here, especially with the part of, I'll give you a second just
I
now.
just want to know that word neo, what was it called?
Neo-patrimonialism. Neo-patrimonialism.
Mbali, I want to bring you in here. Mbali, I want to bring you in here, and I want you to speak about, moving forward, how can we ensure a more informed citizenry? And I know that you touched this a bit in your earlier presentation. So moving forward, we spoke a lot about Section 24A, but then a lot of, the IEC might come and say, but we told people about Section 24A, so on and so forth. Moving forward, how can we then, one, raise awareness, citizenry awareness when it comes to all of these electoral processes, and how do we get them more engaged in these processes?
Thanks. I want to leave the bulk of that. I want to leave the bulk of some of that to actually our IC expert here, because I think that she can't comment on some of the political stuff, so let me rather give her the ability to comment on what she can comment. But what I do want to say, there was something that was posed by Ubani just now, which also speaks a little to your question, is I think that because we've given our power to public representatives to vote on our behalf, is it not time that we have a conversation also in South Africa about the direct elections of some of our office bearers? Because in that way, we give ourselves more of an ability to hold them to account, but also for them, they don't have to do this horse trading as much as possible. And you can have a situation where you have both, because obviously we have a closed list system, and this is what brings us to this point now where we are, where there's a patronage of giving out different seats and votes that gives us a bloated cabinet or a bloated executive. But at the same time, we still aren't going to get anything from those people. I mean, what are we going to do if somebody doesn't now, who's the Minister of Water and Sanitation, do their job? We're still at the mercy of hoping that in this GNU or Grand Coalition, whatever you want to call it, that they'll be able to call themselves up. But they're not going to be able to, because now they're all in the same pie. So I think we have to have a conversation about, let's move towards at least direct elections for, things like mayors, things like presidents, and give them the power and also be able to take them away. And then it gives them the ability to also not then have to be at the mercy of now Prof, we know sizile ukuthi ngithole i-SIM card ukuthi ngifayelana, so naye kufanele nginikeze isikhundla esithize. Because if you don't have that, then you can actually free these people up to do a lot more. And obviously I'm being optimistic on the best case scenario, but it's better than I think what we have now, because we're not going to get to the place that we need to get if this is going to be the horse trading that goes around. I also want to say something a little bit about the markets. And I think one, in general, people don't really understand economics in this country, but two, my problem is I think that the media has also amplified what was the fluctuation of the rand on those few days, which if you actually look back and take a real historic look, I think over the past 5 years, it does this all the time anyway. It was just this time now that they were making coalitions that we were pretending like if the DA is in there, the rand is going to get stronger. Once the DA is there, the rand is basically back to where it was before. But people were so engrossed with this idea of how the markets really, move just based on what's happening in terms of sentiments, and it's not true. And this is another part of just in terms of when we talk about politics in this country or civic education, it has to have financial literacy in it, it has to have economics, it has to have actual political science, it has to have voter education and civics, because all these things come together and become this huge part of what is our political economy. So we can't also teach them in different segments, because then you leave one thing out. If we just tell people how to vote, but we don't tell them actually this is how the markets react to things, or this is what economics looks like, or this is what tariff trade-offs are, then you're also leaving people behind in that sense. So I think that we need to have more comprehensive education when it comes to politics and the political economy in general, and it can't just be for people that are in university and being taught by a prof. We have to find a way that we're doing it on the ground, because these are things that relate to people all the time. If May's meal is going up, she needs to understand, okay, this means that my social grants can only go so much now. Why has that happened? Not just Imagine somewhere said that now things are worse off, and that's what it means, because it goes way back. It could be because of wheat farmers, all these things that are so interlinked. So I really want us to get to a stage where we can have proper political economy education as part of our civics in this country, because without it, we're going to have these discussions in pockets, and then we can't actually solve our own problems.
Thank you. Mrs. Nasinga,
Thank you
I
very
pass
much.
the bill to you.
Sometimes I wish I can share my opinions on what's happening with the political maneuvering that's happening amongst parties, but I can't. I'll be fired tomorrow. Thank you very much. On creating an informed citizenry in general, I think the sooner we all realize that this is everybody's business, the better. Let's treat every opportunity that we find as an opportunity to educate. I'll make a very quick example. If I go to the city center, I don't drive. I Uber from my house. And I ride with this Uber driver, and who doesn't know what I do for a living. And then he says to me, you know what they've done to Msholos? And these are conversations that take place in their spaces. And unless I address it there and then, to say, what is it exactly that we benefit as a country from Umlut? How do we benefit? Are you aware of malls that were burnt down and people lost jobs? And those malls were never revived. They're not there anymore. Because I think we have this tendency of wanting to think that it's somebody's responsibility to teach responsible citizenship. In general, I think those are the things that we really need to occupy those spaces. Another example is the work that we've done with the Department of Education in this province as an institution, where we have developed learner support material that infuses democracy and human rights educations into the formal curriculum for grades 10 up to grade 12. It's something that we say we cannot be there as an institution in every pocket of this province, but how can we invest on people that can further disseminate this content for us? And we've been very successful in this province that we have had a very listening department, and we spent 2 weeks together with the curriculum specialists in the department and created lesson plans for educators who were saying, we want to teach this content inside the classroom, but we don't know where to begin. We've given them content, and they've got lesson plans in different subject areas where they are able to teach about our democratic dispensation as a country, about our constitution, about electoral democracy. So for me, those are some of the opportunities that we can undermine, where we can talk to one Uber driver and make the Uber driver understand the politics of this country, what is going on, and what do we benefit from these kind of actions. So I thought I would just make a point on that one, but I'm not going to run away from the VMD. Somebody spoke about the VMD at the back table later on, and somebody spoke about Section 24A. I think we have struggled as an institution to maintain a balance between automating our systems and making them more efficient at the voting station level, whilst keeping remaining true to our core function as an institution. Honestly, I think we got carried away as an institution in terms of the number of applications that we installed on this VMT. There were 9 different applications that were running from the VMT. They were recalling information from a data center that is centralized, whilst there was a dedicated server for each one of the reports that we had. We had a report of people that were approved for Section 24A. We had a report on people that were approved as special votes. We had an app that monitors attendance. We mark attendance register on the VMD, which has enabled us to pay people within the first week after elections because there was no paperwork. We have an app that tracks ballot papers at every level of the distribution value chain. There were a lot of apps, 9 in total, that we were using. What we're not able to do as an institution, which I think is something that we're still going to go back and do an introspection ourselves, is it is impossible to test, to stress test this system across 23 voting stations, because what you need to do, you need to open all voting stations and operate them as if they will operate on the day and test the resilience of our ICT support infrastructure vis-a-vis the number of apps that will be operational on the day. I think we learned our lesson. However, we do have manual backup. Whilst we have a voters roll that is on the VMD, we have a hard copy voters roll at the voting station where we still mark people as having voted. Whilst we have an e-list of people that are approved for this and that, we also have manual copies of those lists. But we say Tina Ngapagati IEC, I think there's Tagatiwe in terms of our systems, because we tested our systems for the registration weekend. First weekend, there were still glitches. Second registration weekend, they worked like a charm. We go into elections with the same kind of ICT support infrastructure, but we believe, once we haven't done, I did say we're still going to do our debriefing, we still did believe that I believe the internal processing capacity that we had supporting these VMDs. The VMD as a tool has no problems. Is the support, back-end support, regarding the processing of the information on the VMD that was a challenge, but I think we've learned a lesson, and I think we learned it early enough as an institution to prepare for local government elections, which are even, if we think these were challenging, these were a walk in the park. Because in most cases, what should have happened, just to respond on the Section 24A case, if you arrive at the voting station and you are approved as a Section 24A case, the VMD should have told them that. But what the VMD was doing, the VMD was reading a raw data file from our data center. For example, instead of reading a data file for people that are approved Section 24A, it will read a data file for special votes. So you wouldn't have been on board. So it will come back and say you're not there, but we accepted proof of an SMS confirmation that you produced, and there was also a manual copy of people that were approved as Section 24A cases. But we upfront admit that in terms of the ICT infrastructure that supports the functioning of the VMD, as an institution, we need to go back to the drawing board. And I also believe that we need to minimize the number of applications that we throw into the VMD, because City VMD akube yona sebenza station. We throw in so many internally developed apps, by the way. Those are not apps that we purchased from the markets. They were internally developed, but stress testing whether all of them will hold on the day is where the challenge was.
So, reflections?
I mean,
Things that I can have an opinion on.
yeah, but I was still thinking you were going to summarize the question, but it's fine. You know why I was complaining that I'm being sabotaged? It's because I'm a gestures person. I speak too much with my hands. So this mic may go there and I may not be able to project the voice too. So that's why I mean, in other spaces, and Brian knows that sometimes part of my technical writer is that I use that mic specifically. Deliberately, so I'm not going to dwell much on the question Bandile asked on liberation and all those things. There's a reason why I don't go to it. And I like the fact that he unpacked it in terms of the different types of liberation and concepts that are there. I don't want to go much on it because, I mean, if you look at liberation, you must first also look at the idea of what you are being liberated from, right? So if you are being free, you are being unchained, it's a matter of what you are being liberated from, because that's how you gauge how far you've went away from that, right? So for example, in South Africa, we said we ended apartheid, right, in 1994. But some of the attitudes, behaviors, traditions of apartheid still prevail today, right? Someone somewhere one day said, one thing we didn't realize, I think it's more Prof. Mahobe Ramoswat, and I'm not sure of who exactly said, but I'm going to say what I think they said, is that one of the problems that we did was that while we changed the government and we changed some laws, we forgot that this machinery of apartheid was maintained by people who carried particular attitudes, behaviors, and traditions. And this didn't just go away because there was a new law in the country. The fact that we can drink together in Umhlanga does not mean that now the attitude we have about me has changed. I have now the right to sit with you at the same table, but what you think of me may have not changed. So when we speak about liberation, I mean, we speak the big concept of economics and what you call. There is a very big problem at a social level, where we have people who we claim live in one nation, so that's why we speak about government of national unity, but who do not, who live in leaky enclaves of different nations within a country. So therefore, those people, how they relate to each other will never be as one. They will always see each other as different. And also we must be mindful of the skepticism of those who were always left on the outside. When suddenly everyone says they are in, but the social infrastructure and how it works every day shows them that they are outside. So let me make a practical example before I try to be too smart. If you say to the people of Mayville that they are part of the new South Africa, and remember we live Mayville, make an example of where I was born, 125 what the woods are Dorengob, right? Where I was born, MKB, where my mother's family lives still today. My grandmother is 75 years old, same age as my grandfather. My grandmother 10 years ago was running after a water can, water can to get water. 10 years later, she's doing the same thing. So when you speak about liberation in relation to that legal aspect, what do you mean? What has really changed? Because that person, in terms of the general mainstream makeup and social infrastructure, was always on the marginal. 10 years later, she's still there. There is no industry next to her in terms of making sure that her children are able to find jobs in terms of training and skills development in the area does not exist. You still have to travel, right? I mean, this is not something of pride, but I'm just going to say it. In that family, I'm the only university graduate. It shouldn't be that. So you have all these people who, in terms of the social infrastructure you claim to have built, majority of them can't see it, can't feel it. So when you speak liberation to them, in those small, it doesn't make sense. The last point I'm going to touch on before I am accused of taking too much time is the idea of the attitudes, the consciousness of the voter, right? And what I'm going to say, Prof, is that one of the things we must look at is the fact that to maintain the type of state and type of society that we've had, one of the things that we have done, and even though some people will not want to admit to, is that we have deliberately depoliticized South Africa and issues. So potholes, which people like to speak about, is one of my political issues. It's an issue of misadministration. It's not the fact that in Mayville, where my friend lives, there is a stormwater that has burst every week, every day, is now an issue of the integrity of the infrastructure, not a deliberate political issue. So we've made our people to not think in political terms. They now think in terms of issues. In terms, no, but it's me. It's just that Tamile is not delivering. These are deliberate political mechanization of society that makes the issue of Mayville to be what it is. I spoke in another podcast, I think Usletu is here, spoke in their podcast, and I said, directly tied to the issue of Mayville is the land question. You don't want to speak about it, it's fine. The people of Mayville don't stay in Mayville where there is poo on the street every day because they like it. Because they don't have access to any other possibility. They don't participate meaningfully in the economy to be able to get a better place of living. Other than that, they don't have access to land to be able to build a new place. So they are almost stuck there. Then you say, no, the issue is that's the integrity of the infrastructure. Of course. But there are these other big political issues that we want to speak about. The other element is that is miseducation. There are people who are deliberately miseducating our people, right? To make sure that they are able to shape this idea of people's power we speak about. Because if you've educated people in the way you want them to think, I agree with you, we must learn economics. But part of why we are so critical of the economics we are fed through the media is because it comes from a particular point. When the media says the markets are happy, they are not just saying it because they want us to know economics. They are saying it so that they shape our consciousness, they shape how we use our people's power. So it must be criticized from that point. Of course, while doing the serious work, groundwork of making sure we teach the correct things. But we must also take this on at that point. Because it's part of a particular agenda to amplify the voice of the markets, of individuals, of the international community, and some people were even going around getting people from all over the world to come. Yeah. I mean, the idea of how we legitimize things that should not be legitimate in our democracy. What should be important is that the people of South Africa know that they vote, they are registered in terms of voting, they go on the election day, they vote, and the outcome of that we respect. But suddenly to legitimize all of these things, we don't bring elements that are not part of the equation as per our constitution. And let me stop there. And then tell me now what to stop. We'll add other things as we go. Thanks.
Okay, so our panelists have touched on quite a lot. I want to open up the space to the room for any clarity-seeking questions or any questions that we might have. Okay, we have Avin, we have Manzuza, and we have Big Zenzo. In that order, please. Melusi will come after Big Zenzo. Please, let's be brief. Avin, I beg. Let's be brief.
Okay. Yeah, there's so many things I want to say, but I'll just try and confine it. Colleagues, the uncomfortable truth, we're sitting here 11 months down the line and complaining about the government of national unity. How many of y'all participated when the comments were opened by the Deputy President of South Africa for coalition governments? Tomorrow, the coalition governments for local government closes. How many of y'all have taken part? Y'all will be here 18 months down the line complaining about the same thing. Right. Now, the problem I have with terrorists, with no disrespect to you, Prof.
The question, Avin?
Yeah. No, the question is that what Mbali said, that we as the citizens of the country, as shareholders, need to take responsibility and hold the elected representatives accountable. Nothing else is going to change. Like, for instance, now I just want to make the point at eThekwini municipality. The DA was vehemently opposed to 27 million rand being spent on vehicles. Now, suddenly after the GNU was signed, they now voted with the ANC. So we are in trouble, guys. We have to now forget about putting your cross every 5 years and think everything's going to be kosher. The real work starts now. Thank you.
Thank you. Manzuza?
Thank you so much for indulging me again. Maybe to Professor Breakfast. On your side, do you think you've done enough to ensure that you play a very impactful aspect in educating the community? Why is it necessary for us at the present moment to have collaboration there corner and the need of having EGNU? And the second question goes to the gorgeous young lady, Mema Singa. When we look at EGNU, do you not think it's a direct contrary to our PR system that we're using to vote? Because it says the representation needs to show how famous the party are. When you look at how our government now and the cabinet is reflecting in terms of numbers, have we done enough justice in ensuring that PR system is maintained? Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll just, I know that I've given Big Zenzo and Melus an opportunity to ask questions, but all Prof has to leave us. So I'll just give you an opportunity to answer the questions that have been posed to you, as well as your parting remarks.
Yeah, I think with my footprint in the media, I am contributing to discourse. We spoke about discourse earlier on, that the function of discourse is not just to circulate views, but is to frame narratives. And I think we must contest, dominant ideologies in the public discourse. in particular the one of market fundamentalism.
Thank you, Prof. All right, so we'll take Big Zenzo afterwards. Melusi, you can get ready as well to ask your question. Please be concise, leadership.
Before I apologize. A process point. Can we give a round of applause to the Prof? Thank you very much. It seems that we are connecting one of the guys from Ekrebecha. We've had Mr. Dr. Ongama Mtimga, we've had Prof. Ngomezulu, even though he's a child of KZN, but they're all at the NMU. It seems NMU is taking all of them and making sure they become a powerhouse for intellectualism and the sort of analysis that we want to see the rest of the universities. Perhaps now about Fonzigalala, Melubuyele lapha UKZN uzama ukubasimamisa ngoba ngathi kuyateka lapha. So it's important that we try and reconsolidate power. So thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much for your indulgence and your information. Siyabonga kakhulu.
You're audible.
Oh, yabo. Ngizocela ningixolele manje. Sona ngiyasizwa kodwa asiyiphambili ngale ndlela engifisa ngayo.
Don't worry.
But ke ulungile asiqale la. I think ukuthi for me as a young person kulo 30 years with democracy ngendlela engihlaziya ngicela kube umbono lo nothi umbuzo. Ukuthi sinenkinga ukuthi sisebenzisa amazwi engewona achaza into noma amazwi siwasebenzisa ukuchaza enye into ashenye. Ngikusho lokho njengokuthi sometimes words do not mean what they say. Like with democracy for us, I don't think it's really democracy. The way things are happening, it's like it's a rule of oligarchy. Very few controlling those who we think are representing our interests. Also, in our preamble of the Constitution, we say South Africa belongs to everyone who lives in it, which is a blatant lie. Because I don't have a land, it belongs to white people, yet I'm a South African, so you can see it. So the secret is there. And something else that we say, I think white people, when they were using the word discovery, but they were dispositioning us. So what is happening right now, I have to explain to majority of black people in a white man's language. They can't understand what I mean to say in my own language, that is disposition. So we only think of, we want our land back. It's not the land that we require. This position was not white people taking our land only. Our cultures, our belief system, our understanding, our being. So every time now I have to imitate the life of a white person to say the Western is doing like this, so even I as an African I have to follow that path, which is wrong. Now we have to think differently on how we can construct a new world that represents the interest of African people, not to follow the West, because doing that, and all of us, I'm sorry to tell you the truth, that we are very effective in delivering the Western education to us, and we don't understand. Like what you are saying, if I have to take that information you are sharing with me to rural areas, I can't even do that because some of the words we are using I'm not familiar with, therefore that information cannot reach them. So the rural people who are voting, who are the biggest constituency of the political parties, are not represented in this so-called GNU. Thank you, just wasn't that question. Thank you.
Thank you. So Zenzo, they're touching about being modernized but not being westernized. How do we then change democracy and make it into an African context but more as to a South African context? Lucy?
No, I'm going to left. Maybe first I'll focus on the issue of voter turnout, because in most cases we tend to compare voter registration number and then voter turnout when it's election day. You know, for me, I've been thinking about this a lot. But one thing we need to understand and also check is the process that we use in both activities. If you talk about voter registration, I think you do it 3 times. And also in terms of voter registration, you can register everywhere, anywhere where you are, you can register. We even go to taxi rankings and do exhibitions and ask taxi drivers to register. But on the voting day, there's only one voting station where a taxi driver cannot reach because he's always on the streets. On the voting day, there are people who are refused day offs in their workplaces and they cannot vote. So comparing voter turnout with number of registered voters, for me, sometimes it doesn't make sense because the processes are just not the same. Maybe we need to look at the way on how we can reach those who are unable to go to the voting stations on the day. And also, IEC. There's a lot that's happened on the voting day. There's a lot. You know, I heard Umam Lapa speaking about Police in the presence of party agents and observers. But one of the voting stations where I was observing, the area manager came in around 12 with a box that is closed and came in and then put the box there and the voting continued. You know, so I'm not sure in that case. Maybe the issue is lack of education among party agents. They don't have enough information in terms of what they need to do. But also, we cannot keep on blaming abanye abantu with negligence. Yabantu abaprofessional ekufanele benze umsebenzi wabo ngendlela ekufanele bawenze ngayo, and then blame abanye abantu ngenxa yokuthi baswele ulwazi enough. And then lastly, I think as we are concerned about voter turnout, we also need to equally be concerned about our outcomes of our elections as a whole. Because some outcomes will discourage those who have gone to the polls to vote. They will not be going to vote in the next elections. That, for instance, a leading party lost power because people were no longer confident enough, but still we are led by them again. Through our collisions, journey, whatever you can call it, in case at end we are led by a party that got 18%, and we are expecting people to go again in 2026 and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so because of time, I will take your hand. That will be the last hand. Please come and ask your question because we still need to give our panelists an opportunity. Please make your way forward, sir, at the back. Please be very concise. I ask very nicely. Please be concise with your question. Yeah.
umbuzo khona ukumasebehlangene ikhona imikholisi yokuthi ngempela abahlangana ngalezi impiso zethu angifanekise nje lawa zonatana NFP ngoba isikhonda esithola ngithi ngeke senze akuzobulala nomshado kokuthina sokugayida ngalo kodwa mina ngiyayithanda lethu democracy because abantu bakhulumile ngakithi why decide abantu ukuthi befanele benze ukuthi nokuthi bathi asahambe siyasebenza sonke noma kuthiwa asifonani mina angisho ukuthi ngiyasupport. Ngiyabonga ukukhula kuka-president ukuthi abanikeze le nto abayifunayo. Angithi yabo khona into engididayo sesikhundleni la usihlalo into ethi so-minister la so-accountable lo-president yini ezokwenza yini after. Angithi yabo so-ke muthi ukukhala kakhulu mhlawumbe le nto le siyaqala thina ukuthi yenzeke kumina personally.
So the question and the comment there was to say, we're here encouraging social cohesion, working together. So why is it now a problem that our political parties are working together? My panelists, we're out of time, Jamani. We're out of time. So please respond to the questions that have been posed to you. And I do ask that while you are responding to the questions, rope in your closing remarks as well. And but let's be mindful of time.
No, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. Umpepet is saying we didn't give any one political party an outright majority. It means as voters we are forcing them to work together. Specific questions that were directed to the IEC. The issue that I cannot not respond to is an area manager arriving with a ballot box full of ballot papers in the middle of the day. If you recall, there are people that voted on Monday and Tuesday, and those ballot boxes were kept overnight. There are all some political parties record national numbers which is in. On election day, the priority is to get the material that we need to get the voting station up and running. The area manager in the voting stations out 10 cannot deliver that material and still carry our ballot boxes out 10 from 10 voting stations from the special vote days. The framework is that they go and collect those during the day. Also, we get our ballot papers because our ballot papers that people would have voted in on Monday and Tuesday. Because we don't count on Monday and Tuesday, we count on a Wednesday. Those have to be brought back to the voting station during the day because they are not a priority in the morning. Because we are only bringing them back to count them at souk. So an area manager walking in with ballot boxes at 12 midday is part of the framework. That's exactly what they are supposed to do. The question that was asked earlier about proportionality, retaining proportionality, bless you, retaining proportionality in the building up of the National Assemblies and the legislatures. Our constitution is very interesting. The constitution empowers us as the Electoral Commission to constitute the National Assembly and the legislature. Beyond that, we do not feature as the Electoral Commission. So ours is to make sure that we retain and maintain proportionality in the constitution of the legislature, which is what I was talking about in terms of how we allocate seats in line with the percentage support that each party received. Once we have built the National Assembly, in the election of the cabinet or the provincial executive councils, unfortunately, the law then empowers the premiers and the presidents to do that. So that's why it's very easy for the president or the premier to create an executive council or a cabinet that has no resemblance to the proportionality attained during elections. Because the law actually empowers them. It gives them that absolute power to build a cabinet that they think will work for them. So that is by design of our constitution. And unfortunately, changing the constitution is almost mission impossible because there are 2/3 of people that are sitting in parliament agreeing on changing a clause in the constitution is something else. One last example, if you look at local government level, you've got representatives of local municipalities and district councils, and those are elected. The composition is in line with the proportionality attained during elections. But the balance of power changes in municipalities every day when we go to by-elections. but you don't see that reflected in the balance of power at district level, which is always a problem. Political parties will make a lot of noise about it, and then forget about it. Come local government elections again, they will remember, oh, we didn't change that aspect of the law. So sometimes we've got this tendency in South Africa of being hyped up about something when it's still in the public domain. The moment it disappears from our eyes, we forget about it. So there are a lot of things that in terms of the legislation we have an opportunity to change now. We should have an impact on local government elections in 2021, but we've forgotten about those. Thank you very much.
One thing we must try and not do, and it's something I was going to say earlier, so I want to say it now.
Say it.
Is to make South Africa's case an exceptional case. I think what we have done all over the years, even in our framing of our strategy against apartheid, we always have this idea of South African exceptionalism, as if the South African case is such an exceptional case that there is nothing in the world that we can relate to and learn it from. As if the building of the South African state and its political machinations is not informed by global systems of power and how power is attained and maintained in the world. I don't know if I make sense with what I'm saying, but I think it's very important. We have this idea of just thinking things are happening here in South Africa and in South Africa only. And if we continue to do that, then South Africa almost loses its positionality as a citizen of the world. Because we almost want to create it outside of what is happening in the world. And that's going to be very important going forward. Another thing I want to pass by, I mean, it may not be related to some of the questions that you asked. I apologize for that, but I think it's important. And I touched on it in my initial intervention, is that to propose a changing of a constitution is not anti-constitution. And that's my opinion. Because it's very important. The fact that I say the constitution must be amended does not mean I'm against the constitution. In fact, I may be one of the best people in terms of being pro-constitution. Because I'm saying engage in the processes that are inside the constitution to change it. I'm not saying discard the constitution, let's go somewhere else. So the idea that we've made in this work is that if I say, for example, of course I'm on record to say I agree with the amendment of section 25 of the constitution. Right? I agree fully. And for me to say I agree with amendment and not the discarding of the constitution, I'm supporting support of the processes ingrained in the constitution. So it must not be seen in this country that if if you don't believe that something is working or it's good, it's as if you don't love democracy, you don't love peace. In fact, to propose that these things must be done peacefully, in itself is indicating of the fact that I'm a lover of peace. Because I can choose other methods which are not so peaceful. The last point, I think, Bandile touched on earlier, which I think is very important, is that he speaks about the idea of the conditions, and it's tied to this idea. And I'm sorry if I step on anyone's toes. That's the nature of discourse, unfortunately. Is that this idea that this is what the people wanted. I think we must disabuse ourselves of this. Because now we are then saying, to the question Angelo Bandilo was asking, of whether the conditions necessitate a government of national unity. We are now saying to him, yes, because the people wanted it. You hear what I'm saying? The people criticized heavily the state led and administered by the ANC. What the people got is an ANC continuing to administer a state they've criticized them for and they've punished them for. In KwaZulu-Natal, the people said, IFP, we hear your message, but we will not give you 50+1 majority. We give you 18%. What happened? the government is led by a person who got 18%, and that person is deciding the makeup of the Executive Council of KwaZulu-Natal when he has less than 20% of the confidence of the electorate. So this idea that this is what the people wanted is problematic. What happened is that because of the mechanisms of our constitution, we have to have the best case scenario. What happens? Okay, if you don't get the necessary support of the constituency, you can then try and work together to try and build this what's called consensus. This consensus of the people amongst yourself. Because the people did not give any of you individual consensus. So this idea that this is what the people wanted is problematic. For example, in the government of national unity, you have a situation where a party that got less than 30% of the votes, rejected by more than 70%, wants to go into the talks of the government of national unity and dictate how things must happen. When, in fact, they were rejected by close to more than 70% of the population, or the voting population, if I put it correctly. So you see, in terms of that issue, it's problematic to believe that this is what the people wanted. If the people are now presented with this idea because the constitution allows for it to happen, what the people must learn going forward is that if they want a particular party to govern, they must vote for it in majority so that they don't have to cry in future when the constitution allows for people to govern even though they don't have their support. That's the lesson we must learn. But outside of that, the people don't want this. They indicated that they don't want this. But unfortunately, as law-abiding citizens, they will have to live with this.
All right, thank you, Tovani. Bali?
Thank you, I'll be very brief. To the gentleman who was talking about how we look at voter registration and then the amount of and voter turnout and the discrepancies that are there. In some instances, yes, I agree with him that you have more time to have people to register. You have the form of now registering electronically. You can do it online. There's lots of organizations that also help you. So there is more emphasis on being able to do that. I don't think that the problem, though, is the IECs about whether people can vote anywhere or not. That was something that was done by the political parties. They were the ones that said, in these elections going forward, that is not something that they want in Section 24, which goes back to the point I was making earlier, that some decisions have been imposed on the institution that is supposed to carry them out. They also have rejected electronic voting as political parties in this country. So it's not as though it's something that hasn't been discussed. It's something that they have said they don't want to have happen for various reasons, some of them legitimate, some of them not. But I agree with you in terms of the spirit of how can we make sure that we make it easier and better to make sure that Abantu have more opportunities, including things like making sure that if someone is working on the day, they should have gotten the day off before. But local, I don't think we can put it solely on the IEC. It's something that we must talk about and it's something that we can legislate going forward. And I think it's a very valid point for us because I think it does amount for some of the discrepancies between the people that had the intention and the will to vote who didn't get the opportunity for whatever circumstances that they were. And then, I just think that we also, with all the problems and the issues that we've raised, and I think Tobani raised some interesting ones about also the MK has 45% here. Whose fault is it that they were not able to reach across the aisle to get the requisite 50% that they needed to actually form the government? And do you really expect that the other parties that are so diametrically opposed to what they think the MK is, we're going to just sit around, even if they're 3%, being in politics is also about wanting power so that you can do something with it. And we mustn't also over-intellectualize that some of these people are going to do whatever it takes for them to be able to get there. And I would expect nothing less from the ANC because they also aren't used to not being in power. So of course they were scrambling to see how they were going to constitute their group, even if it means that they were their worst enemy, GDA, whatever gets them across the line. And they were told, I think, by the MK, everyone knew that the MK was going to do well if you're already following politics and doing focus groups. We started about 35, 38%, but it was an anomaly that a party of 6 months came in and got 45%. And I think the shock from the ANC, even though some of their own colleagues, also just made them a bit frazzled. Now we don't know who to trust. Now we don't know what's going on. Because if you looked at those voters that were coming in, and like I said, we had observers everywhere. Emlas, Entuzum, Kwamash. As the observers were sending us the results slips, you were seeing in Dawa where you know there's an ANC councillor, but the MK to the 70%, which makes you think, on the ground. And I think that the ANC themselves was also like, woo, in these 14 days, as far as we that we're not sure if Saisa going forward or not, even though it's not like they don't know each other. This is mostly a faction of the same party. And so we also mustn't, I think, forget the political dynamics of just how people react in terms of human nature. I don't know if this GNU is going to completely last. And let's be honest, the last 3 presidents of the ANC, when they go towards the end of their second term, they get out before they even reach that next Congress. So if people are already calling it Cyril's deal and not the ANC's deal, maybe for a year and a half, and then the next person comes and is going to say, we are refinding ourselves as the ANC, we are reshuffling, whatever it is that they're going to do. And I think that's why I was saying 2026 for me is going to be the test of if GNU is actually something that is going to hold and it's something that it can be workable, or if it was really more convenient because they only had 14 days to try and make a decision on how things were done. So I also think we mustn't, and not to say overthink, but we mustn't put too much stake in the fact that people here were doing real power moves to make sure that they stayed in power. Not because they were thinking down the line, hey, listen, we're going to do the budget, how are we going to conceptualize it? The DA believes in one thing, we believe in another thing. And they should have won the confidence and supply. Last point, because I go to one this cut. Last point is there, we must also really celebrate as South Africa. I think a lot of people were looking at us 30 years into democracy. In most countries, this usually means they become more democratic or less democratic. They rule by the gun or they rig elections. We mustn't underestimate how well we did, I think, as a nation to have peaceful, democratic elections, and that we've shown that we can transition. There was no bloodshed, despite what people may have said, and that's something to really be celebrated and to say, even if our democracy isn't where we want to be and we haven't been liberated in all the ways, at the very least we know now that we can have arguments, conversation, discourses, elections without anybody having to die like our ancestors had to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you, Vani. Thank you, Mrs. Masinga. Thank you so much, Tobani, as well. You can take a seat. You can go back to your seat. So I'm about to let Unjomani take his place again, but if we're listening very closely to what our panelists have said, as diverse as their opinions were, but they all went back to one thing, which was citizen participation, which was us taking action and actually,
Thank you very much. Round of applause for Tabi. No, well done, Tabi. Thank you very much for capably hosting that session. We really appreciate the feedback and engagement from our panelists as well, in terms of just getting to the core of what it is that we're engaging in. Yeah, I have a lot to say, but I think we must do a different format slightly next time around these discussions. We must have debates. But I think that's where it's heading. And there's something but when so many people will be spawn in Tampa, one to the same we need are now, and based on what it is that we conceptualize for ourselves, for this country, for the future of this democracy. There are a number of things that we are careful about when we are engaged in conversation and dialogue. But I think it debates this later. We'll think about how to do that more proficiently. If I just were to switch off, part of what we wanted to be able to do today is just to let you know that we are hard at work on consolidating all of the inputs from various fragments and parts of our observer mission. As you're aware, we hosted a 350 full observer mission. By how many people? 3,000?
Yeah, just about 3,000.
3,000 people from Bali Properties Groundwork Collective also observed the election across the country. And so when we look at that footprint and that mass of people who were able to be a part of those processes, we don't talk as a generality. We don't talk because Sisiabazi or Mrs. Masinga, Sisiabazi or Dr. Shomwane, Sisiabazi or Sai, Sisiabazi or Chominabo. When we talk about endorsement of the process, by and large, we do feel that it was reflected. There were significant issues, but those issues are issues that don't materially affect the outcome, we feel, based on our observation, but ultimately also can be resolved in the upcoming elections in terms of the way in which the IEC itself works. So our work in consolidating these inputs, largely, we want to be able to thank our various partners, including guys like the Land Use Forum, the YMCA, Institute for Mental Liberation, the OCCD, Center for Community Development, but Nibaning in Azazi, and we want to be able to say thank you for that collaboration. Gatuga, ngizwa kuthiwa imali esithi thina stipend iholwa abantu abasebenza kuma-elections mhlambe kumele sisebenzele impela nangithi milincane kodwa-ke uma ilingana siyabonga nathi ukuthi sikwazile ukuba nalawo mandla. Of course, we want to be able to ensure that it's not always a voluntary process. We understand that we live in a place in time where unemployment is rife. But we also want to say that just because the opportunity is available doesn't mean that it's for you as well. You can be able to pass it on if there are other stakeholders and people that you feel might be able to do the work better or well, in the interests of preserving this democracy of ours. And when I say preserving democracy, I don't mean that I'm also opposed to changing some aspects of the Constitution, because one thing that I must caution us from doing, and in the same vein which Tobani talks about, we mustn't think that we are exceptional as South Africans. There's been some memes, we're an exception to the rule. There have been some memes that have been going around, for instance, a picture of the executive from America and then contrasting it to the current executive that we have in this country. And they're saying the population sizes are different, etc., etc. But what you miss in that conversation is that the systems of governance are also quite different. And so the system, federalism versus the unitary state that we have in this country is also quite significantly different. So there's a nuance to the public discourse that ought to be happening that is missed in the meme culture, in the social media trending that I don't think we're doing enough of. Sometimes you must be aware of the things that you clap hands for and the things that you ignore. Because when you're a son grade, but you will go because you're in that spirit at that moment. And so it's important for us when we engage that we engage critically and we analyze. Take a moment of pause and think through what it is that we're talking about. So in our collective understanding and the work that we've done in building the space of election integrity, we've not just done election observation, for instance, but before the election we went to more than 20 communities across the province, but also in parts of the country through the partnerships that we have. We were able to convene radio station talk shows, over 20 of them as well, across the country, and so it's important. And we focus specifically on community radio stations. So sometimes abantu basibona la elangeni kuphela bacanga ukuthi sabantu bala cha we have some level of influence and a feel of what's happening on the ground. Someone asked me just before the elections, someone from a political party, and they were asking, do you think we're going to get a seat in provincial parliament? I was like, no. And unfortunately, they didn't ask me for why, but they were hurt by that. And unfortunately, they didn't get a seat, you know. And because it was visible, this province, there was too much noise politically. And if you weren't willing to sit still long enough to listen to that noise and understand what's happening, you had your own aspirations of, you know, things will go. Chairperson of so-and-so portfolio committee, and I take it to PMB, you know, I'm going to get, you know, all of these nice things, whatever perks that everybody ran away from. You know, but it's important to just be willing to sit still long enough to understand that the KZN in particular is quite complex. The wins that we have in our communities and our constituencies don't guarantee that we either have a future potential growth for scaling up in this conflict, in this province, nor does it mean that the work that we're doing is in vain. And I speak also from a civil society perspective, that in the midst of the noise, some of us just because people think that we're speaking a language that's different from their aspiration. So we might come and tell you about civic education, constitution, how laws are made. We're not doing it to silence your activism. We're not doing it to silence your protest. But we're giving you the tools to be able to enable that protest to have meaningful impact in the spaces in which it ought to. And so that's the scope in which we've moved into the space of election integrity. That's the space in which we've moved into the space of civic education. But we hope that you can be able to take this and use it. Part of the challenge that we now have is how do we translate what happens sometimes here in Angeli into communities? How do we ensure that you yourselves as vessels of knowledge have come into the space? You don't occupy seats for the sake of occupying seats. So now it's about how you asking yourself, if you say, hey, critically, what are you doing to get us there, get that message there? Does the way in which you convene and talk about things in the country right now change the way in which you talk and convene Ekaya, change it and impact the way in which you convene conversations? It might take seed. If you sat in a taxi just before the elections, you don't know what's happening in this country. You don't know what the outcome will likely be. So I look forward to seeing you in the future. We will be launching the report in the next 2 weeks. By launching, I mean publicly available. We're still sort of consolidating some data points, but we want to assure you that we are aligned quite heavily on data that's driven by our election observers, but also that's driven by the tools that we were able to deploy during this election. Second floor, please see Suraksha before you head out. Thank you very much for coming through. We appreciate your participation.